Hello everyone. Right. So I'm going to be talking about how you might add static analysis to a legacy project. And in the context of static analysis, a legacy project is any project that to that point hasn't used whatever static analysis tool you want to add to it. So imagine a situation like this. You've been to a conference or you've heard about something at Meetup. You thought, oh, I really want to go and try this brand new static analysis tool. And you think, yeah, let's go and do it. You've convinced your colleague, we will go and do it. And you run the tool and it finds millions and millions of issues. And certainly if you use tools like SAM or PHPSW and you run that on any code base of any size, you will find lots and lots of issues. But this could be other things as well. This could be, we've just started a project and we've run ESLint on it and it's found many issues. Now, some of these you can automatically fix. So for example, if they're code formatting things, often your static analysis tool might have a fixer mode and the fixes it does can be completely safe. So you can get rid of a lot of them, but you'll probably find on any project, there's still a lot of issues that need to be fixed. And you probably won't have a million issues, but you'll probably, on non-trivial projects, have many. So you could think, oh, well, that was great, and let's do it on our next greenfield project. But there's no way we can introduce this to this project because we're not going to fix 30,000 issues before we move on to some new code. So if we are in a situation like that, what we could do is we could draw a line in the sand. We could create something called a baseline. So we'll say, well, add our new tool, our new static analysis tool to our workflow. We'll run it. We'll fix what we can realistically fix. And then we'll just say all of these issues, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them in a baseline. And when I run my static analysis tools again, I only want to see about new things that have been introduced. So we've got this line in the sand. So how this works is we have our initial commit, we have a series of issues, and we say these are all in the baseline. Then we do some more coding. We run our static analysis again, and we have more issues. Some of them will be ones we fixed. Some will be new, and we just want to highlight the new ones. So we just say, this is the new one. This is where we really want to be. We just want to see the problems we've introduced since our baseline. So I'm going to discuss 3 ways we could do this baselining. The first is we could just count the number of issues. So we say my project's got 2,378 issues, and when I run my static analysis again at CI time, providing the number of issues is the same as or fewer than 2,378, I'll count that as a pass. And if we've got more issues, then I'll say this fails and we need to go back. Now, I don't think this is, it's a way of doing baselining, but it's not a very good way of doing baselining, in my opinion, because what might happen is you might fix 5 or 10 like quite low priority issues and introduce one huge big issue. And that's not really a good way of doing it. If nothing else, you could do it this way, but I'd advise against it. So another way we could do this is we could make our baseline up and we'll say we're going to go through each file and each type of issue that's raised. So we could say, for example, in source entity person, we've got 2 lots of a possibly null reference and 1 lot of a redundant condition. And in our login controller, we've got 3 lots of possibly null arguments. So this is our baseline. So instead of looking at everything in the whole project, we zoom down to a file and a type. So this is then our baseline. We're going to say at the time we ran our baseline, here were the issues we found. So those are in our baseline. And then we run static analysis again. And we simply count up per file what all kinds of issues are. And if any of those counts have incremented or there's a new one, we will say that it failed. So here in the baseline, we had 2 lots in the person entity. We had 2 lots of possibly null reference. And now in this latest run, we've got 3 lots of possible null references. So we would say there's no way this is going to pass because some developer somewhere has introduced a problem. And the nice thing about doing it this way is we've localized where the issue is just to one file. So we can say it's somewhere in here that we've added we've added one. We don't know which one we've added, but maybe if somebody looks at the diff, they can say, oh yeah, that's where my problem is. So we've done the redundant condition. Well, we've got the same, so that would be classified as a pass, but because we've got at least one fail, this would fail. And at the bottom, we've introduced into controller a brand new issue type of invalid return type. So yeah, this would fail. But if our baseline was same again, and our latest run, everything is either the same or fewer, then this would be a pass. So in here, in every case, we've either got the same number of issues, or we have fewer issues. We don't have a redundant condition, and we used to have 3, and now we've got 2. So we're slowly making things better. So this way of doing baseline, this would count as a pass because we haven't got as many issues as we had previously. So this way of doing it, where we divide issue types per file basis, I think this is quite a good way of doing things. And this, I first saw a tool called SARM do this, and it released at the end of 2018, and then PHPStan had copied this idea, and then that came in sort of the midpoint of 2019. And there is another way. On this point, there's a few things. This is nice, simple. This is a really simple way of creating baselines. You can just run a tool and it does it all. There are a few issues with doing it this way. It can't cope with file names. So if we rename a file, if we renamed person to employee, even though in person we had like whatever, 3 or 4 issues in there, when we've renamed it, our static analysis, our baseline will say, well, this is a completely new file. So all those issues are now new, and all you've done is renamed a file. So I'd argue the issues were in your baseline, and it's just the fact you've renamed a file doesn't mean you've introduced new things. That should actually say can't cope with renames and moves. The other problem with this way of baseline tracking is if we said one of the issues was redundant or missing return type, you could fix one missing return type just when you're in the code, and then you could add some new code, which is a new instance of a missing return type. So actually you have added a regression to your code base, but because the numbers are still the same, it will say, oh, I think this is okay. Also, kind of coming on from that point, you do have to maintain your baseline. So what happens is every time you fix things, you want to recreate the baseline and recheck that in so the counts are lower and lower and lower every time you fix something. So this was one way, and I first saw this implemented just towards the end of 2018. But in the middle of 2018, I started working on a tool called Static Analysis Results Baseliner, or SARB. And I'd never seen this much simpler way of doing it, so I came up with something that was a bit more complicated. But I'll show it anyway, because it has different pros and cons compared to the simple way. So the way that SARM and PHPStan do things, they look at issues per file. What SARB does is it tracks issue types per file and line number. So we say we have this issue on line 10 of whatever the file is. SARB is also a standalone tool, so you can use it with anything. The baseliners in SARM and PHPStan are specific to those tools. It's just built into part of the tool. And it uses Git to do all the cleverness of tracking where all the files have moved. And if you're interested, that's where you can find it on GitHub. I mean, I'm slightly biased, but I think this is a reasonable way of doing baselining. Although if I'd seen how SARM and PHPStan had done it, I probably wouldn't have bothered with this, because in a way it's simpler what they've done. So what happens is you create your baseline, and it remembers the Git char of where you created your baseline, and then it says, I've got this type of error in this file at this line number. So it stores all this information in the baseline. And then imagine we have our code, and let's say we rename person to employee, and then we're also moving the file as well. So it used to be source entity person, now it's source entity employee.php. We've removed 20 lines of code, and then we rerun an analysis, and it says on line 73, we've got this invalid So we've done all our code changes, and then we're running the analysis again. And one of the issues it finds is on line 73, we've got this invalid nullable return type. So the question we now need to ask is, we've made our baseline, we've done our changes, now we're running it again. We need to know if line 73 of employee.php was in the baseline. So this is the problem. Did we have this in the baseline? And then what happens is we say, where was line 73 of employee? Using Git, we can work out where that line was in the baseline. And if it is in the baseline, our history analyzer, which is some internal bit of Saab, will say, at the time you took the baseline, this line of code was actually line 93 in person.php. And then we say, well, in our baseline, did we have a problem, invalid nullable return type at line 93 on person.php? So we go back and have a look at it, and yes, we do. So in this particular example, we know, we're pretty confident that that issue was actually in the baseline. And if at any point, if any of those steps failed, so for example, we created a new file, then the history analyzer would say, I don't know anything about this file. So we'd say, well, this must be a new issue. And if it turns out that we found some nullable return type in person on line 70, when the history analyzers worked out where it was actually on line 50, we say it's not in the baseline, so we'd report that as a new issue that you've created. So this is a slightly different way of doing the baseline. It has pros and cons. It can cope with file renames and moves. That's just the cleverness of Git. New issues will always be reported. You'll never get this situation where you remove one line, you remove one issue and create another one, but because the count's the same, it will think that you haven't added something new. It is more complicated. You have to interact, you've got it, it's a bit more faff than the other ones to set up. And there is something which I'm not going to really go into, but if you had two issues on the same line of code, and you change that line of code, Saab would think, well, this is a new line of code. So you might have fixed one of the issues, but the other issue will say, well, this is a new issue, okay? And this is kind of a limitation of Git, really. So even if you use this, it's not perfect. You kind of want a cross between what Saab does and what PHPSW and SAM do, but I haven't worked out how to do that yet. Now, whichever baselining technique you take, the kind of process is the same. You run your static analysis and you fix any bugs you decide you're going to fix, or if there's an auto fixer that can safely fix anything, then you run that to fix any of the issues. And then once you're happy with that, you create a baseline and you'll check that baseline into your repository. And then you just go round and round in a loop, you write some code, you do your analysis, and you use your baseline to say, show me what issues you fixed since the baseline. So show me what issues I've created since the baseline, and then I just keep fixing that. And we just go round and round and round that circle forever. So a few questions about this. Should we ever recreate our baseline once it's been created? And I say, ideally we wouldn't, but there are times when we do need to recreate our baseline, and here are some of them. If, for example, we upgrade our tool and then suddenly it has more checks, or we increase the level that the tool operates so it's more strict, or the tool gets its own upgrade and has some extra rules, what we'll find is we run it again and suddenly it shows you a whole load more issues. And if you can reasonably fix those issues, go ahead and do it. But if you can't, then your best thing is to say, all right, I'll create a new baseline, because essentially these issues that it's just found, well, they were always in the code base anyway. It's just you've got a bit stricter. It's always safe to remove entries from a baseline. So that's fine. I mean, that's what we want to do. Over time, you'll probably find, I mean, I've been working on a project where we introduced static analysis maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And when we first ran it, it may have 3,000 or 4,000 issues. And now it's down to about 600. And that's just because as you touch new bits of code, it will interact with your old bit of code, which was in the baseline, and you'll start just fixing things anyway. So your baseline won't be static. You will be doing fixes and fixes and fixes, which mean that you can reduce the number of issues in a baseline. And if you're using the SAM or PHPSW one, it is important that when you do fix things, you do remove them from the baseline, so it prevents you from adding new things back into it. So yeah, in this case, we know we've done our original at the baseline and we've got a new one, and we no longer have this redundant issue, and we've gone from 3 to 2. So that would be a point where I'd check it or create a new version of the baseline. There's another time when pragmatically you might have to say we're going to have to rebuild our baseline to add things to it. Imagine, and again, this is kind of a real example. I had some code that was around since it's over 10, 12 years old. And back then, you couldn't give type declarations. So I did everything in dot blocks as type hints. And a lot of them, I would say this getPerson method returns something of type person. But in reality, when you look inside it, you realize it actually returns something that person or null. So if I was going to go and fix it, I could get rid of the dot block, and then I could say it actually returns person. But the problem with that is, and I know this is actually the case because when I go and look in the getPerson method, I can see that it does null or person. But the problem with that is other code, which previously was relying on this incorrect information, knows nothing of whether, or in the signatures it says, I assume they're persons, it can't be nullable. So what happens here is I've added in correctly, I've said this is nullable, but in the baseline, because all of this kind of stuff was wrong, suddenly it thinks anywhere that uses the response from getPerson, if I said this only takes person, it actually can take person or null. So now our static analysis tool will say, hang on a minute, you've made a mistake here because you're not counting for the nullable in the signature. So providing these are all like dot blocks as this old legacy code, I kind of just say, well, I can't go and fix this because you might think it's just one line of code I've changed. So I'll go and change this line of code and then it has a knock-on effect here and then it has a knock-on effect. And by the time you're done, it ripples through the code base. So in times like that, I pragmatically say, I've fixed something, I've made it better. Any future code that calls my getPerson method will know that it has to deal with both a person or null value, but I'm not going to worry about the legacy stuff yet. I assume it works because my code isn't crashing, and probably if I go into all of these methods, they really do handle the null case as well. So there are some times when you really don't want to have to increase the size of your baseline, but you kind of have to, just because otherwise this would hijack you. You know, that on one of my projects, this little change is probably a day or two of fixing. So I'd rather not worry about that just yet. And then you might think, well, if you've got all these things in the baseline, will they ever get addressed? And actually, I found they do get addressed just when you're working on the projects, because, as I say, you've got new code that's interacting with the old code, and you generally are fixing things. But one thing I did add to Saab was this thing where it's this cleanup option. So what that does is it will remove, you run your static analysis, you pass the results into Saab, and you say, remove my baseline, which is stored in there. And if there are any issues you've introduced since the baseline, it will list them all. But if you do the minus cleanup flag, it will just pick 5 at random that's still there. And then you can just have a go at them. And the great thing about that is because they're random, you can, like, your aim is I'm going to fix 5 every day, or every time I've got a little gap in my, between one feature and the next, I'll just go and fix 5. And you can run this and you go, oh, those 3 are really easy. I'll go and do that. Oh, that's the other 2 I don't like. So you just run it again and find another 2. And I think that's the difference between getting a whole long list of them, because when you get a whole long list of them, you're either looking at the ones at the top or the ones at the bottom. So I think the randomness I've found does actually help. So if you do that, if you fix 5 a day, then every developer will fix 1,000 issues a year. And that's not including stuff that just will naturally get fixed. So actually, you've got, you can do it. If you just do little bits every day, keep chipping away at it, actually in a year or 2, you might have a code base where you don't need any of this baselining tool. And you might say, this sounds amazing, but my static analysis tool, it's not SARM, it's not PHPSW, it doesn't have a baseliner. And I've looked at Saab, and Saab does support a list of tools, but my tool isn't one of those. How can we do this? How can we use this? How can we use our static an analyzer if it doesn't have a baseliner and Saab doesn't support it? Well, Saab has something called the Saab format. It's just a JSON file. and it's just a series of entries. And for every entry, for every issue we find, we've got to give it the line that it's found on, the file that's found on, the line of code, the type, which is something like the rule that's being violated, a human readable message, and a severity. So if we can take whatever our static analysis results format is and convert it into this, then we can just use SARB. So for example, if we had another format like ESLint, we could look at this and go, right, in ESLint, what seems to happen here is we have a file, and then for that file, it's got these messages, and these reach like an issue, and those are repeated. So what we need to do is we need to loop around the file, then loop around all the issues within that file, and then go on to the next file and so on, and convert that to the SARB format. And that's actually quite simple. I don't know how readable that is. But all we're doing is we're going to write a little PHP script. It just reads from standard in. So we pipe the output of ESLint into this little script, and this little script will then get piped into SARB. So we're going to basically get our contents from standard in. We're going to convert it from JSON into an array. If it can't, it will just die if it can't parse it. It's probably one of the few cases I think die is appropriate in PHP. Then we've got an array of issues, and we loop through the outer array, which remember is there's one entry for each file. So we get the file name, and then we loop through the messages, which is all of the issues that it's found within the file, and it just pulls them all out, adds them to the issues, and then we just JSON decode that into a pretty print string, and then you can pipe that into SARB. So actually, you can pretty much use any tool, and you don't even have to be restricted to PHP, as long as you can convert its output into the SARB format. So hopefully you're thinking, amazing, let's start adding static analysis to all of our projects. And hopefully, if you've got some static analysis tools and the reason you haven't used them, or the reason you've not thought of using them, is because what will I do with all of the issues it tells me about, baselines can help you. I've been David Liddament. Thank you for listening. Any questions? Yeah. Oh, it's always going to be a difficult question.
How do you ever get history tracking? That's a lot of complex code.
It is. It's not something I can answer very quickly. Well, we can go through it together, but it's not something that's probably suitable for them. There is a Git option, which I can't remember what it is, and it does the patches, but it can also do the patches across file changes. So what I do is I get this at the high level, I get this diff where it does track file moves, and then I've just got something that parses the diffs, and then and there's some pretty unsexy code where it literally just counts things. It could be a lot more efficient, but yeah, that's kind of how it does it.
Process the whole thing.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, quick, is it?
It depends how many issues, and how big the diffs are. So actually, what you do have to do from time to time with SARB is regenerate the baselines, just because eventually the diffs get so big, and then it takes a lot longer to do. Oh, I mean, I run it. I mean, it's like maybe 10 seconds, and PHP in a VM that's not particularly fast. Yeah. Cool. Right. Oh yes.
Does it show the sort of progress you're making against the baseline? You know, is it something you fix properly that you sort of work on something new? Yeah. Does it show kind of like how you've...
Yeah, for sheer vanity, I left that in. So what it does is it says at the time the baseline you had like, whatever, 2,000 issues, your current count is like 676. And I left that in because that means you can feel a bit happy every time. So you're not really worried about the first number, but it's just how many you've fixed. But I put that in because I wanted to know, and then I've left it in because I thought, that actually kind of does encourage you a bit, just, yeah. And that's also why I don't want to recreate the baseline, because then it will back to where it started.
Will you consider to return part of something stable?
I'm sorry, do I consider what?
Will you consider to return part of this?
Sorry, my hearing is really, really bad. Sorry.
Will you consider to return part of the system instead of fix issues?
What, to keep repairing the system instead of fixing them?
Yeah. So Where do you cross that line? Where is the maximum number you should be?
Oh, I see. So the question is, what is the maximum number of issues before you'd actually do fixing before actually moving on? I think, so the thing about legacy code bases is often they are working. And a lot of what you're doing here is just tidying up and make it easier for developers to not make mistakes in the future. So arguably, in fact, every project we've done, we might have spent maybe half a day to a day looking at the static analysis results before saying, well, this is our baseline. And if your project is largely working, then there's probably not much benefit in spending days trying to fix the issues before you create a baseline and go on. Probably, if you're talking about tools like Saab and PHPSW, which are quite advanced static analysis tools, they have this concept of levels as well. So what I'd probably do is if I was introducing those, I would start off at their least strict levels and just look what it comes up with. Because at the least strict level, that is probably something that is a real problem that could be causing your code to crash. So if it's PHPSW, I'd start off at level 0 and go all the way up to about level 5. And I'd just be looking at what there is. Some of them I'd fix. Some of them I'd go, okay, this is just a way we'd have to change how we're going to do things. And then probably once you get to that level, you bang it up to the max level and just go with the baseline. But if you're adding static analysis because your code is crashing all the time, then you'd probably want to spend more time at that stage. Is that okay answer? Yeah. Any more? Yep.
Does code work with, does Star work with code sniffer? You mentioned Star.
I can't remember. It works with one of the, I use, in my composer jobs, they're just PHPSW Fixer, and I can never remember which one that is.
That's code sniffer. CS is code sniffer.
Yeah, I don't know if it's Symfony, Friends of Symfony 1 or the other one. It works with one of them anyway, yeah. We use the other one, there we go. Yeah, so, yeah, but I think Saab does support code sniffer actually. I'll have to read the docs. You've got both, yeah. I can just, I'll tell you at the end actually, I won't know. It is all on the first page of the README tells you what it is, so if I can get there quickly enough, I'll answer that question now. Saab is also the main bank of South Africa as well. When you type Saab in, it's South American Reserve Bank. What tools? But if it didn't, then you've seen how you could add it. We have got PHP Code Sniffer. Yeah, does work with it apparently. There we go. That was a request from someone else. I think they largely. So, yeah, you can either extend it like that, or you can actually write something called a results parser that is more integrated into Saab. And I think somebody else largely wrote that. So, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Brilliant. So, oh, thank you.